Mata from Heidelberg University, brilliant paper which used all the drawings from Abanindranath Tagore of the Bharat Mata. And actually, come to think of it, there was this little bit of on a lighter note of why we love the Bharat and why we will not give up Kashmir, because Bharat Mata's head is Kashmir, so it is, I mean, they can't give away. So you know.
Yeah, we're fine with the lobotomy.
Actually, Nalini Rajan has done. Joy published it. A very open-ended book on communalism and secularism.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Okay. Just recently?
Yeah, and it's for younger people. It's for.
Okay.
I think
That should be worth adding to the list.
We must ask.
We'll get some coffee and tea here, and just move to the next one, which.
Actually, I've stuck my one out, right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Suruchi is going to take us through this.
Yes. So I just do how the media are organized globally, nationally, regionally. What about the media are actually like any institutions? At the same time, they are they also have a public interest goal. So which kind of distinguishes them from any other profit-based institution. So how do the two come into conflict? And also we focus on the news production process, looking at the impact of market ownership structures, individual journalist role, professional codes, how we do these different factors which are like very macro and some of them are very from within the newsrooms, how do they influence the news production process? And finally the open web, with the start of the digital medium, there's been a complete change in the way news can be produced now, and there can be obviously all these things. Anybody can produce information now, and so we are kind of moving from the age of a very fixed one-way information to a two-way free-flowing information. So, and that the challenges that offers. The third theme would be focusing more on the media content and the audience, how audience interpret different media messages. Obviously, these are introductory ideas, and these themes will be separately dealt with later on in the course of other semester with more intensive courses. And finally, we look at the rise of the digital medium and how the digital medium kind of questions some of our traditional assumptions of these media theories. So these are some of the recommended readings. One thing is this Dennis McWell's book is like a very good basic book of the day. It introduces all these general concepts, and obviously some of these others we can take chapters from there, like Proto and Points. It's a very good primer of what is media ownership, why it is important, vertical, horizontal integration. This kind of gives kind of a definition of these concepts. What is missing, however, here is there is no Indian author. While I do this, and this is something we need to look at, how to make this course into more relevant to the to the context where we are teaching it. That's currently not there. So here probably I would like to have your inputs on that area. And this is basically one course. It's I'm going through the learning outcome. It's probably it encourages students to question some of the traditional assumptions. So it's intended more to be like a critical thinking, improves critical thinking and analytical skills, and it introduces certain basic theoretical concepts and how those can be used to understand the functioning of the media. So I go on to the next course, which is journalism theory and practice, and this is basically focuses more on what role journalism should play in a society. This is the key question versus what role journalism does play in the society right now. And what about, this is the key question that we're asking. And obviously, it looks at the key challenges to the to the profession right now, with business models collapsing, the digital media coming up, and the related question is that when we have with the digital media coming up, we have such a huge deluge of information. So what distinguishes the professional journalist's work from the amateur information that can be produced by anybody. So it's like there's a kind of thrust on the question of ethics here. So the way we've conceptualized is that there should be a theory part and also a practical aspect of it. Firstly, the theory part, it kind of looks at what is the key function of journalism in different political systems, and how that changed over the years. And like that's not the intention is not to look at just the American and the British model. Like there are other Asian countries, there are African countries. It's kind of a challenge for us to see what kind of role journalism traditionally played in all those political systems versus what's here. So it's also kind of it covers the history of journalism. Obviously the focus should be India, but while we study Indian journalism from the early print era, pre-independence role and so on, we keep the comparative perspective in mind. And how did the newspaper's role change from from a more political role to currently what we see right now? And obviously we kind of look at, I mean in the Indian context it would be the post-90s with the changes happened, the television, etc. The changes in the news media landscape and how they influence the professional ethics, how we practice journalism. And finally this course would look at which is the most topical issue right now, which is the internet and democracy. Is actually which is everybody discusses, does internet is it a source of democracy, because we know how people get power and these ideas, but obviously there are other issues to it. Firstly, the issue of surveillance, censorship, and obviously other contemporary issues related to more with the ethical questions like fake news, for instance. If internet is used by independent websites like Wire, there is also a whole the political establishment is using it for other populist purposes. So how do we address these issues? So that's kind of that's the theory part. And there should also be a practical element to it, where we introduce what is news, what are the different forms of news, so basic ideas, and how would a particular story be treated across different platforms. For instance, how would a story be done if does Times of India and BBC treat the same story in a different fashion, and the other thing is that with the internet, what is the difference between news and information? What is it that makes information into news? And certain ethical issues, how do we actually incorporate it? How to validate information? How to report accurately? And there could be probably one element of introduction to the basics of the news production process, which we can cover. How obviously the news would differ across print, broadcast, and the digital medium. So one particular news item, how would I treat it across different mediums? For instance, in digital it would be like a text, image, video-based thing, and that would completely, in a more traditional print model, that would be completely varied. So that's the thing here, and so I'll just kind of discuss the reading list again here. I mean, I included Orange's 2012 book is obviously there, and the latest ones we can look at introducing some of the chapters maybe which could be
That's
useful.
the last book. I haven't updated it since lots. But it gives you a background.
Right, yeah, I think it's an intro to
What I've tried to do is, there have been a number of books on media ethics across the world. The difference is that I've tried to fill the book with as many examples from media.
Exactly, there's a huge void in the discipline as such. Though there are a lot of Indian academics based in foreign universities, they're writing it in a more I mean they wouldn't have probably the insight of you, or not doing it in a platform, critical platform like EPW. I mean it's these are more they're more specific. They intend to reach out to more specific audience. That's the one thing. And the other thing is obviously Robin Jeffries' book. That's it's I would really recommend. And there are working papers also if the students cannot read the entire thing. obviously there would be Robert McKenzie's book has been, I've included it, Chomsky, Edward Herman's book is there, probably portions of it it could be included here. So here again I would like to have your inputs on this. This is like a course that comes in we intend to propose, include it in the second semester, and it's kind of a continuation of the initial impact of mediums on society course. This was conceptualized more as a sociological course. It's basically introduces students to the basic key sociological works, classical and modern, starting from Marx, Durkheim, Weber to Giddens, Bourdieu, and obviously this is a media program, so we keep in mind the relevance of these key sociological works in understanding media. So these are it would be useful to probably break down these courses into different themes. So for instance, power and democracy. That would be a very, to understand certain contemporary issues of the media currently. It's very important to know generally the sociological debates on power and democracy. For instance, if kind of question like the debates on cross-media ownership. So even to understand that, why is it problematic for a few people to own the media, it's essential for, students to know the, basic, the liberal and the radical views of power and the kind of the debates on them. And finally, social and economic inequalities, that's like another key subject, which is, very relevant to media. Globalization, to look at film industries, for instance, across within India, and also like the Brazilian television or Korean wave. Globalization is an important theoretical concept to understand these phenomena. And finally, social change and action. We need to kind of reach currently with the internet, and also before the internet, there were various community platforms to understand their functioning. It's basically it's important for students to have an idea of these these theoretical concepts. So this is I've not included like the original works here. Like I thought probably portions from the original works can be included, which we are still developing the syllabus. But I think this Dylan Litt's book Power or Radical View, it's a great book. I thought which could give a kind of good summary of the key dominant currents within the discipline of sociology, and that can be as a model, and obviously we can add to the readings to that. I'm not going through the outcome.
Yeah, forget the outcomes and all this. I think we're just.
And this is the kind of fourth course within which would be of the second semester. I think this is a very important course, media law, ethics and policy. Everybody should do that. It kind of looks at the statutory regulations and the ethical issues that govern the functioning of the media. Obviously, we start with the statutory protection of free speech rights. And coming to India, obviously it's not, we do not have not only, there are certain on grounds where there are certain grounds to which legally there is no free speech is not protected. For instance, national security and some of the other things under which we challenge that free speech protection. But obviously, most importantly, in this context is obviously there are certain political and other factors which kind of challenge the free speech here. In most of the cases, if a website is taken down, it's not only it may not be following a legal provision. It could be done illegally also. That happens here. So these are some of the things that we keep in mind. Online censorship is a very important part. And obviously, what about ethical frameworks? Globally, there are things that there are frameworks like a reader's editor. We have one here with us now, but generally, in India these are not very popular concepts that has, Hindu had one for a long time. So certain press council, obviously, I mean, you've written about it and like it's a,
Also member of 3 years.
right. And so there are like, various issues to be discussed and like, should media institutions have a common code of ethics? These are some of the questions to ask, or, why do most of them not have a, certain ethical codes? And so what should be certain ethical standards? And finally coming to media reform, we should again come to the subject of internet and like how do we actually address the restrictions on the internet currently. So that's kind of dealing with the media reform. And obviously the second, the whole debate on cross media ownership in India, and like, there have been, globally there have been a long standing debate on ownership on airwaves. These are some of the things that the students need to be aware, I mean, as in the first 2 semesters with me. So that's how we kind of conceptualize it. And then we've included like most of the reports here, the International Federation of Journalists report, Article 19 has reports on South Asia, which is obviously it's a bit dated for 2005, and some like, there are like other chapters and books that we could upload from here. So, okay, I mean, I'm not going more into it. It's like this kind of gives a functional knowledge of the law and ethics that govern the media, and they kind of have having this knowledge, they kind of have more the skills to kind of address, when there are, probably their stories somewhere has been held up for something, or there's a defamation case. It kind of gives you equips you with the knowledge to address those issues. For practicing journalists, and for others, they need a overview of media. So yeah, that's it. I mean, I'd like to have your views.
Yeah, we'll do the communication now after we do the discussion.
Yeah, after the discussion.
Yeah.
At least on paper, looks very academic, too dry academic. Second thing is, I think we need a little more of Indian examples, like let's say Tribune, or the non-profit models, other things, so getting a practical exposure to things happening. And I think, did you do that, what was press council report that was about the paid news?
Yeah,
Paid news. Yeah, obviously those should be part of
Paid news, and there is also a try, who did the cross ownership report? Try.
Right.
Yeah.
If I can just add to what you're saying, Josie, Central Board of Film Certification, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, the ministry itself, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which is the licensing authority. Then you have, of course, the Press Council of India, and then it's very important, you also bring in the CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team, which is part of the Department of Electronics and Information Technology in the Ministry of Communication. Having gone through that, these 5, you should look at 3 self-regulatory bodies. One is the Advertising Standards Council of India, the other is the BCCC, and the other is the NBA, News Broadcasting. I mean, just at least an overview that these, we have these multiple authorities, some statutory and some self-regulatory. Just an overview of this.
And certainly the history of BIB, for example, would be very interesting.
Yeah, also how governments enter.
Yeah, I think from your communication technologies, I think it's an interesting country because the government funding is still for Doordarshan and AIR. Social messaging is still to that. Coverage is that you've got an intimacy. So that's
To just take what Radhika was saying, just one a little further, is a comparison then between what are seen at least as government voices and government mechanisms, as in Doordarshan, so on and so forth, as well as when and at what point you see those voices coming into private players.
Right. And the other thing I forgot to mention, which is the Working Journalist Act, I think you mentioned, which is like very important, and the entire wage board debate, ending with the judgment, ending with the Majithya. So that is something definitely that should be included here.
And I think when you, sorry. No, I was saying when you, ethics in terms of information flow, I think looking at certain tools like ANI, for example, looking at specific organizations that give news feeds to journalists, how do you critically look at something like the role of an ANI?
Agencies, you mean international agencies.
Agencies,
Right,
the
yeah.
fact
But
that they-
ANI is very interesting. It goes beyond the agency.
and I
It
think
just
ANI, correct. And for
But with a lot
example,
of government support.
Yeah,
Almost
yeah,
as an
absolutely.
alternate
Yeah.
to the
Yeah, exactly.
and
PTI, ANI, the fact that all our foreign news feeds, and this is just a practical thing in our television channels, comes from APTN.
Yeah.
So,
Associated Press.
right. So, I mean, I think introducing
Oh,
this
yeah,
concept.
Also in the reading section, I think some autobiographies of, let's say, B.G. Varghese or Nihal Singh could be helpful in understanding the media
Kuldeep
evolution.
Nair.
Kuldeep Nair's book, you know?
B.G. Varghese has written on Goenka.
There's one other
Ram
book which
Thakur.
is missing in this list.
Since you mentioned Tribune, V.M. Datta has written a history of it.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
In its centenary year.
So, some
And
of
there's
the
a history
Indian
of the
books.
Hindu also.
The famous UNESCO report.
Yeah.
That that old one that with the NWICO debate.
Sean McBride.
McBride.
Yeah, McBride put that.
McBride.
Information flow.
That should be right. Yeah, McBride.
International.
Sean McBride.
Many voices, one voice.
Yeah.
Yes, that.
One word, many voices, whatever. One of the things that Josie said, I feel very strongly because this is a section which is very important, and I mean, my reaction will be most students' reaction. People going into journalism exactly don't react very well to a lot of abstract theory, etc. I mean, we tune out basically, unless we are dealing with specific examples, case studies. And I think much of the reading should not be these books, but journalistic writing in India on the media over the past 5 to 10 years is extensive. And that is where we should mind what we actually need to look at. If you want to look at ethics, questions of ethics within the profession, ownership, etc., good case studies, there is nothing like take a CNN, IBN, see the change in ownership, what happens with governments inside. I mean, the Working Journalist Act is key. Protections within journalism, television and digital, it doesn't exist. So there are actually, by law, no journalists in television and digital in the country. There is no journalistic protection. But, I mean, in the abstract, we will not be able to take this in. So specific examples of specific organizations, case studies is the only way I can see students actually reaching out.
If you go to, just to add to what she's saying, if you go to the Root and News Laundry,
Yeah, there's an
That's
excellent
very
resource.
interesting
Yeah,
case
that is
study.
there. That obviously we plan to,
My favorite-
include portions of it in different.
We also do
My
a
favorite
media
is
issue
your
every year.
BCCL
Paramount,
salary story.
and Himal South Asian.
Made me feel how small I am.
What?
I said my favorite is Paranjoy's old story in BCCL salaries.
Jojo wrote back.
Until then I used to think I'd be like this tiger in the office. Yeah.
It would just be interesting for me at least to see how media pre-independence, which would work for as a underground media, really, you're talking about a media which is constructed around a struggle for freedom, works in comparison with post-independence underground medias. So alternate medias and how they function.
Yeah, this letter, what is it?
Yeah, excellent. Excellent.
Some case studies it should
Book by Beatles, right? I mean, mainstream. Case studies also because they are the best way to illustrate.
Right.
I mean, when we talk of the question of revenue, the question of viewership, whether you have a circulation model or whether you have an advertising model, what it does in terms of choice of reportage, what has happened with opinion and reportage, the difference it makes in terms of how we process choices,
Church
all
and
these,
state
talking in the
concept.
abstraction doesn't help
Yeah.
till we
And
actually.
that revenue point becomes absolutely critical because I work very closely with Globalization and it's pretty much relying on a grant. So it's highly acclaimed, talked about everywhere.
Yeah, but it's
But it's
limited
struck
to that.
completely. And
Yeah.
whereas we actually have to go back to getting a grant.
Yeah.
So I think there tends to be a sort of romanticization of alternative media without looking at its sustainability.
Also,
Or even somebody like, say, video volunteer, who do good work, they're completely dependent on, foundations.
CG Swarnam, he's always on the verge of
The
closure.
wire,
Yeah.
The wire too.
So when you do have independent funding coming in, let's say with the
I think there's a major.
Aziz Brainly Trust, etc., saying alternative. A lot of the alternatives are still struggling and don't get that funding. So I think
What does
revenue
it mean?
funding decides so much for an individual journalist as well. That I think
And so
is-
Blanchard.
and just a basic understanding of distribution, of what the BARC ratings are, what are TRPs, things like that. It took us years to figure it out.
And
I
census,
still haven't figured it out.
censor board
Yeah.
certification.
Panel.
The ABC and the TAM ratings are, how to
Yeah,
rate
yeah. What people are already put on the table. I think it is important to also look at how Robin Jeffrey, of course, has been, he has grown from newspapers to new media. And he's also mobile telephone. So
Cell phone needs
It is really good.
yeah, so that has to be done. I think radio is a very interesting example because it was continues to be a state controlled medium, but at the same time you have FM coming up, and there is this possibility that they may get news as well. In which case it would
The
change
Supreme Court has reserved its judgment for donkeys.
Yes. Yes, so I mean how it could potentially change, news sources, and something like Man Ki Baat, how it is being used. In fact, all these private radio stations are required to carry Man Ki Baat. So Man Ki Baat itself, Monkey Bath is how people refer to it. But the point is how this, and Man Ki Baat is actually very important for the movie.
How can you force a private FM channel to actually
They actually
They do.
they're compelled to carry the.
But they're not compelled.
They're compelled, but
Persuasion.
understood.
It's persuasion.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing statutory. I mean, suppose just for argument's sake, Radio Mirchi says I'm not going to show Man Ki Baat. They haven't actually violated any law or any rule.
No,
It is in their best interest.
Except the
but
red
it's not
flags.
so much Radio Mirchi which has
So
a
it's
little bit of autonomy. I'm talking of, these community radio stations and so on, all of them have been asked to carry it. So they have no
And
leg.
the audiences for it are huge, which is
Audiences are
audiences are huge. So you go to Dausa in Rajasthan and the entire sort of village is gathered to listen to Man Ki Baat.
Yeah.
And it's
And it's organized and it's also valuable for them. So I think in terms of some of the
Actually, I think what the least amount of actual academic work has been done on is radio, weirdly enough.
no, I just wanted to put two names. Perhaps you can put Sunetra Sen, I believe, has talked to you. So she's come out with a edited
I've
book,
seen
which is
that.
not that great
Yeah.
because it's different contributions. But anyway, that's first. And there's Seventy Nine on the Hindi press.
Yeah, that I've included for
Headlines.
headlines from the headline. That is included, yeah.
Sorry.
And in the mainstream thing, Manuel Castells is there.
Yeah.
In fact, you can add the Robin Jeffrey's cell phone nation to your
Right.
It's a very, very important, because you see more and more of media today being consumed on cell phones.
So, Pankaj,
Okay.
if you can just quickly tell us communication
All right, sure.
3
Okay,
minutes.
I will do that. I'm a lazy professor, so I don't have any visual aids. So I'll tell you, about just one course, and break I will talk a little bit about PR as well. This course serves as an introduction to, it's called Communication and Creative Arts, writing, film, TV, and PR. It will serve as an introduction to a variety of real-world genres, having to do with business communication, writing for film, creative writing, as well as public relations and marketing. So, this is a place where students will begin to gain a broad understanding of what these areas of study mean. So this is the first semester course. So when they walk into the room, they're going to talk about, what does what do these areas of study mean, not just in terms of discipline, but also what does the work entail? So what do people who are working in business communication do? What do business writers work on? What kind of writing do they do? And how does this sort of fit into the real world context? But we will also study and talk about how to analyze and interpret text. Seeing text as not just literal, as in typed, but also visual text and oral text, AURAL, text that is heard, music. Also talk about visual communication in a holistic manner, talking about paintings, other forms of communication that are used to get a message across, not just in journalism, but also across the field of communication itself, or creative arts. And also talk a little bit of maybe art history as well. And again, having these different areas come in as a way to expand students' minds to understand what communication means, how communication has always been used by cultures and civilizations throughout history to get messages across and influence people as well. But also, this is an opportunity for students to develop the diverse interpersonal skills necessary to thrive in these dynamic careers where working with people and creativity are the lifeblood. Thinking out of the box, working with different types of technologies, including film, as I mentioned, and just old pen. Pen is my ear on the sword kind of thing, right? So, looking at those technologies or rather looking at the ways in which these different media will give an opportunity for students to express their thoughts and sort of influence the world. So that's my spiel.
To the history, how it all began in America, and Edward Bernays and Ivy Lee were one of the fathers there, and there'll be history and how PR is very different from advertising and marketing and journalism, because people interconnected. That's marketing and PR are very interconnected. So telling the students the difference that PR is not about marketing and how is it different, then bringing them down to about how PR agencies function, how the finances go in, planning up the whole PR image. Then what is the CSR activity? What are corporate communications? Why do we undertake CSR activity? Why are these departments separately formed? And then of course the future of PR, like how has it developed? Because they'll be starting from history of PR till date, and then what is the future of PR? Because PR is a very emerging thing.
Right, great, and I think that just very quickly to talk a little bit about some of the readings and books that we're going to be using for business communication. I've used Hardo Murphy's Effective Business Communication, and writing for film and TV. There's a range of books, but I like Alex Epstein's Crafty Screenwriting. But these books are things that we bring in not as an expectation for them to actually engage with the entire book, but rather, like you were talking about, like little sections, chapters, even sections within chapters. Because some of these things, we're wanting to cover a range of stuff here, so that the idea is that students get a taste and appetite, a little bit kind of whet their appetite into looking at these areas. And with public relations, we have a bunch of books that you suggested.
Because I'll not be giving like a specific book, but chapters and a lot of case studies. How like say companies or like Edward Bernays did that, the cigarette campaign that he did in America. How did he take that up? So like they'll be going into like more of practical stuff, a lot of presentation, a lot of writing, that how it goes in PR. So basically that.
All right.
My thoughts?
I say that journalism is different from us. I mean, from PR, for instance. And we say, and journalists say, yes, journalism is not PR. But actually what's happening today is that they're coming together. And I think it's very important to actually iterate these distinctions. And it's very, because as a professional, you need to say that, I mean, native advertising and so on is now, it's trying to get under the radar and find its way. Yes.
The students should know what's the difference
I think
between.
the ethical point has to be emphasized. And I liked your idea of that creative space, that, I mean, any communication can really benefit from art history, for instance. And I think some of our most creative work is happening in advertising, in terms of the storyline, in terms of how to, because it's so commercially charged that there's a lot of thinking and the best minds are sometimes put to it. And in fact, I had an interaction with this young man who was trying to change gender norms, trying to put public, in the public some of these issues through his advertising. And he always comes against this criticism that what is it, finally you're selling a product, But I think it's important to have the larger ethical, issues, gender, for instance, how gender is represented in art, and ways of seeing, for instance, is so important for that. So many of these issues, I think in a sense, this is a work in progress, and you will have to look at Indian examples as well.
Pamela, if I can just take that point, just
Yeah,
a very
yeah.
contemporary example is if we look at what happened with the Pepsi advertisement in the US, the one with Kendall Jenner, and the Pepsi advertisement which came out when the FDI protests were happening in India.
Yeah.
And you take a look at these two advertisements playing to two different audiences, which are both functioning on protest communities of different kinds, and which audience they're targeting and why, which narratives they're playing on and why, and how that squares in with what the media depiction of it has been, and what advertising is gauging from one and vice versa.
I think it's important also to know the protests. Like for instance, I think one of the biggest things is the anti-tobacco protests. And much of it was through public advertising of various kinds and public information. So while you tell them about this wonderful campaign that was run for tobacco, and again the best minds were put to the task of selling tobacco, I think it's also important to have the obverse side in the picture.
War recruitments, the images used for that, how does that play into regular ad?
And I don't understand personally as a journalist, because what I hear in the idea of communication, and I can understand that, but to me communication is not a value neutral business. And the values you bring to it emphasize the kind of communication you do. So even advocacy and PR will differ in many ways depending on who you are doing that for and how you bring that message in. So till the question of value is central to communication, forms of communicating, yes, they influence. You can take ideas from advertising and bring them into journalism, but by the very nature of the different values that these professions embody, you are going to do it differently. And I think that part has to be necessary in terms of factoring in what communication is. On the larger question of whether journalistic schools, but that's been settled in India, though I don't understand it, that the same schools are churning out both in large numbers.
Yeah, I was in IIMC. My first thing was Vance Packer and the Hidden Persuaders. Now I don't know if it figures in any list, but it was one of those early.
I downloaded a Kindle. They issued it on the 25th anniversary.
Do you have any
Because it
thoughts
was
on this?
No, my only suggestion was that I think you should Indianize the part a bit more,
Right.
especially on the PR and even advertisement. Maybe Amul could be a great. There is a
that
book
will
on
of
it,
course, that will be all included in the history, that how it came even to India and has been persistent over years. It's just that people don't know about it, but it's not that it's not existing.
Yeah, little Indianize the. I mean, that's
Yeah.
it.
No, I think I posed a very fundamental question. The people, the students who are enrolled, do you expect them to be journalists, or do you expect them to become joint PR firms or advertising firms or part of that sector?
Two are often in
Right,
conflict.
right. And you learn.
So the question is that I used to head an education institution once upon a time, where we made it clear that we have certain courses which are common to everyone. After that, in the second year, if you opt for a particular stream, then you are focused only on marketing and advertising. You are not getting any more into journalism. You learn the basics of what journalism is all about. But that is one way of dealing with it. But there is a problem, as Artosh himself pointed out, and I believe Gary with it. None of this teaching is value-free, or neutral. There is, there are the ethics of PR, the ethics of advertising. And that's very much a part of the working of the media. I mean, there are people, there are advertisers and advertising agencies and who are not just advertising products and services, as Pamela was talking, they are advertising social messages, they are advertising So I don't know, I'm very, very uncertain and very unsure how you're going to go ahead.
I think the idea of perhaps.
If I could quickly clarify, just very quickly, this is an introductory course to these streams. There's later, exactly like you're talking about, later opportunities for students to specialize in the third year when they would only be doing public relations or marketing as separate from journalism. And the introduction is also framed as a variety of real-world genres beyond journalism. So, in other words, students who are going to be coming into this class will be studying these subjects, not necessarily as journalists, but rather as people who are interested in how societies are influenced by different ways of communication, different ways of sort of impacting decisions. And so journalism can come into it as examples, because what journalists do is influence people in various ways, but also broaden the scope and talk about art and all these other things, other ways in which people are also influenced. So, I hope that helps in terms of
Well, I agree with the fact that fundamentally that distinction is very important. Visual communication, I think I have a lot of fun with in the Indian context.
Yeah.
Everything from a large part of the UN budgets in India, for example, are still go to designing posters for non-literate areas. Very interesting studies on that. The fact that sectional depictions don't actually get comprehended. That's still a reality. From that to a lot of the online sites that are putting out gender content in very interesting ways. Allowing consent. So a whole lot of a range there that's very interesting.
Multimedia.
Right.
Yeah, people going back to a bit.
The point I was making was actually in the context of the course, which is that if people are going on to do different things, that I think the course should have the element of, that these professions or these forms of communication embody different values.
Right.
And they should be clear about it, and they can make their choices, but then let's delineate the different values and that defines communication.
Out their
they can make their choices, yes. And they can make their choices based on that, and that depending on how the course is framed. The second point is social media, communication. Today, Twitter, for example, for journalists or advertising professionals, Facebook, those have become almost as important tools of communication.
Absolutely.
In ways which are
I think this is even more important what Atosh is saying.
Yeah.
Because today you have a situation where there is actually a vision, where major newspaper media organizations, including Hindustan Times, Anand Result Group, NDTV, are actually downsizing the number of jobs. Young people, and they're smarter than you and I, and you find that, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, there was a boom in this whole media education business. There were, God knows how many dozens and dozens and a few hundred such institutions came up. And then you found that there were no jobs. So then you might find that there would be more people who prefer to opt for a career in advertising and
Advertising and PR.
than become
And
reporters or
for
sub-editors
many young
or
people
whatever.
I spoke to make no distinction really between the two. Journalism, maybe once I join communication, I'll go into PR. So it's like a seamless thing, in their heads.
And I think there is a huge value to teaching young journalistic students how to look at a press release and interrogate it. Why is this being written this way? When it comes to you, how do you question it? Learn both sides of the trade and also learn the ethical values that go with it.
Kishla, if I may just say, take a second. The conflict is very real, and I think since the case of cigarette campaign was mentioned, the case study exists on the other side, and it's from the classic of critical media studies by Ben Van Dijk. It's about how the American media completely suppressed all news about the harmful effects of smoking from the early 60s, after the American Medical Association had resolved that they wouldn't carry any advertising. It was firm medical scholarly research consensus that this is harmful. But for 20 years they fought against making that a matter of public knowledge. It's only 20 years later that it became statutory. The the statutory warning began to be carried on cigarette advertising.
Right.
And much later that cigarette advertising was banned altogether.
Yeah.
So, you can teach both sides of it. So, they are aware of
And today we are
which side they want to which side they want to take.
sugar and energy.
Right.
Coca-Cola
The
and- yeah.
car-driven economy,
Right.
it has resisted all the other possibilities of
Yeah.
public
Like
transport.
like with the electric car, for example, the
Yes.
technology has been available for 20 years, but because of the oil lobby.
No, that's not because not entirely oil lobby. There's a scientific situation to that. We can generate power. That's not a problem. How do you store it? Storage. The one person who is going to crack storage is going to, then the oil industry is over. Then the Middle East is over. I mean, that's a slightly different.
So both sides can be taught. Whether this course or some other course, that's matter for us to decide.
Yeah.
But that conflict, the nature of that conflict should be a little between.
Yeah. Or it should be properly. I mean, there's a clear. The two things are not same.
Right. I
Firewalls.
liked the way Hartosh and Baranja were framing it, in terms of talking about the value of instilling that value difference, the way you put it. And I like conflict in terms of class dialogue, because conflict encourages dialogue, and especially in the classroom setting. Looking at issues in a comparative way helps me to frame the discussion in such a way that students are energized and students are able to talk about both sides of a particular issue, and also, frankly, wakes them up a little bit.
So when you teach the cigarette campaign, you can also take those 20 pages and
Right.
mass reproduce them and distribute
Yeah,
them
yeah.
to the class, and let them bring them both together and decide where they stand.
No, you have
That would be a very good exercise.
There are
I
very,
think.
very unique Indian examples. NDTV may be an exception. They are not.
Media net.
This what do you call it? Whitening creams. Fair
Yeah, they
lovely
have
stuff.
come out,
Goodness
yeah.
gracious.
But that's the single largest
Yeah.
selling cosmetic product.
Yeah,
It's a big
Is that
business.
Yes,
It is.
yes.
Outlook had a cover story where they made 15,000 crores or something like that.
And Express, the Carrier's front page.
While it's being almost set at the same page.
You go to
Yeah.
Times of
On
India,
top
you
is
can
African
express
issue,
on
the
the
Taiwan
net.
Africans.
Actually, it's on there.
Yeah, that was the.
So
Yeah.
maybe you should bring it like this Facebook page called Voice of Ram,
Yeah.
who did the Gurmeher Ko video.
I see.
He's now doing a campaign against Fair and Lovely, asking Fair and Lovely to get out of India.
The Advertising Standards Council actually went into that question.
That's right.
I think they didn't take a position on it.
Because
We
huge,
were.
which is
Never
what
they're the biggest
her
producer.
post where she's teaching the different bodies which exist in the fact that
That's why I said Advertising Standards Council of India.
So when you bring these two
Looked into
together.
the ethics of advertising fairness group.
Okay, we
Actually,
have
we have
very little
national
time now to cover up the rest of it. So we'll just move quickly to the real world skills. Effective
Yes.
communication. Pankaj again.
All right.
Quickly.
All right, Option 1, folks. This course is a kind of boot camp for JSJC students where we introduce broadly the different but related skills of written and spoken expression. The course will focus not only on writing style and composition, but will also incorporate speaking assignments and voice dynamics, thereby encouraging students to express themselves with confidence and clarity, regardless of the medium. So that's like the introductory part. There's quickly, effective communication is in 2 parts. Semester 1 is part 1. Semester 2 is designed to build upon the repertoire strategies for successful communication in the first semester. So the EC2 will focus on persuasive and researched speaking and writing, and this course will help students develop critical thinking skills and research skills, especially having to do with synthesizing perspectives from different sources. How you talk to a group of people, like in a conference, how you would engage with different writers when you're composing pieces. Thus, we will focus on the summary, analysis, and synthesis of spoken and written texts, as well as both traditional and alternative forms of research. Also looking at ways in which students would present material in front of a group of people. And again, both speaking and writing strategies. this is meant to be a skill-based course, not a disciplinary course necessarily. So regardless of whether students want to go into journalism, traditional, or they want to do PR, marketing, so on and so forth, they would still need to communicate in ways that is going to be working for them in a professional setting, so regardless of the discipline. So the course content is general enough for it to cover a wide range of areas, but also specific enough for the skill sets that we're working with. When we're bringing in textbooks such as Everything's an Argument by Andrea Lunsford and so on. So different ways to kind of talk about these two related skills. That is the reason why we're taking 2 semesters to do it. Part 1 begins with it, part 2 kind of builds on that. So, and
Well, again,
there it
very
is.
very
Oh
basic,
yeah.
very basic and practical thing. There's very different writing for all of the different things. So if you're going to be writing for Caravan, that's a very different language. And a lot of young journalists who have New Yorker or long format journalism when they come into television will write about the scorching, parched, cracked, brown.
We don't let them write about scorching
Well-
pastures. We are looking for
Information, intelligence.
what morning in journalism. It's not about that.
We'll go over the issues of Caravan. But
I love Caroline.
I thought it's one morning in
yes,
April
but
we
if you're
left home.
coming to television, then this landscape is enough. Because
I
your
spent
visual
So you
is
can't
telling
say
us-
scorching earth?
No, you're looking at the scorching earth. It's
and
on
it
your
takes
footage.
away, it actually takes away from the image. So I think that you have to keep in mind that again, even
Kind
with
of
writing, it's
Right.
very different if you're writing a PR, whatever, communication, PR.
Which is full of
No,
No,
Yes,
adjectives.
if you're
whether you're
writing
writing for the print medium, whether you're writing for
The spoken.
audio-visual medium, or whether you're writing for the audio medium. So it's an issue of writing for which particular medium.
There's a difference within print as well. Like you'd write differently for the Caravan than you would for the Indian Express.
Sure.
Yeah, the different, you're emphasizing, everybody's emphasizing, if I'm hearing you right, the different writing approaches and styles and in these
Almost
different
totally
platforms.
Well, I think
Almost
television
genres
is very-
completely different. Yeah,
Television is just very specific. You have to people write to your pictures,
right.
and that's how you make an effective story. So I think that
Right.
becomes the biggest
I like that.
challenge.
I think that
Advertising writing again is a completely different writing altogether.
That's copywriting,
So
that's
do
it.
you
That
think-
come under.
do you think, let me put this forward in front of the panel, do you think that these different writing styles, the way you were talking about it, have something to do, probably they do, but what are the ways in which they have something to do with the purpose and the audience that we're sort of engaging with and
Everything.
everything. So,
I mean, it's a cliche to say that a picture tells us a story of 1,000 words.
Mhm,
No,
mhm.
but when you talk about effective communication, effective writing, what kind of writing? That's all.
Right.
What kind of medium are you writing for? Are you writing a script for a television program or a documentary film? Are you writing a script for a radio program? Or are you writing for the print medium or the website? And then comes within each medium, then you have the genres and the subgenres. Are you
Right,
writing
right.
a 10,000 word article for Caravan, or are you writing a 100-word news report? That kind of.
Actually, one of the
Right,
ways, so I've done something similar in tutorials, and one of the ways that I would do it is take a book, any textbook, like War and Peace, and
Yeah,
why
that's
not?
right.
Let the
Why
kids
not?
read War
Why
and Peace.
not
It's good
give
for
them
them.
1,000 pages, right?
Yeah, give them a book and
Yeah.
then make them write a précis of it in different ways.
Yeah.
Let them do a 3-minute podcast.
Right.
Let them do a tweet summarizing the book.
I like that,
Let
yeah.
them do a 500-word article about the book. Let them do
Poor Leo Tolstoy.
Right, right.
Can we just get the tweet summary?
The tweet summary.
Yes, I would love to see those.
That,
Russian agriculture, people die.
all the assignments that you described, personally, I'd love to hear them. There's just, so it'll be hilarious to have 18-year-olds do like a podcast about war and
Right.
peace. So I think,
So yeah, we just be
they
a
might
way.
change the story, they might talk about something.
That's because they wouldn't have read War and Peace. What you'd be getting is the podcast with the cliff notes of War and Peace.
But I think that there are a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. One is, of course, sources. Sources in journalism is very, very important.
Very, very.
And I think there's not sufficient education on sources. And here there's also, case law on sources which figure in, and in law. I mean, the
And try to what Pamela was saying.
POTA, they try to...
Off the record, on the record.
Yeah.
Background briefing, deep
Yeah.
background briefing,
Yeah.
deep background briefing.
Yeah.
Or you know, on the record. You know, I mean, the rules of interviews.
Right.
These are very practical skills.
Yeah.
There is another course on news reporting and editing.
That's a separate thing.
All right.
So yeah, but there will be overlap.
And also this, the rules of interviewing, etc., that we also plan to cover, like a more of a method course in communication, which would come later, which does like how to do interviews.
Yeah, especially
case
disaster
case study.
interviews where you
Conflict
don't
situations.
don't ask intrusive questions.
कैसे लग रहा है?
And, you know, those no, and
Protecting sources, etc.
But I think, I don't know if academic papers figure in your within your remit.
With the thing, yes, in terms of teaching them about the different genres, you know that is also very important to
No,
me.
and how to write a proper academic
How to write an
paper,
academic, that's the second part
How
of
do you quote the references,
How to
right,
cite.
yeah.
absolutely.
That
That's
would come more in the method paper, the way we kind of concentrate.
right. I mean, I think more in detail.
Because I think
you're
there
gonna
is
do it.
lots of
Yeah.
people want to know information, get
Yeah.
Particularly because I've heard from everyone who's gone abroad that they just, after doing university here and there,
We
went,
can't cite.
we don't know how to cite anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the other element in this component is news reporting and editing.
Yeah.
So
That's also coming up next. But
Yeah,
I mean,
this is
we can. I think we're done.
Yeah, so now in news reporting and editing,
Thanks,
ideally,
everybody.
I would kind of sum it up by saying like, okay, people with common sense, and that's the only thing that you need actually to be able to do that. But it'll it'll teach basic and advanced techniques of field reporting, writing, print, broadcast, the usual thing that we talk about, new media, writing. That writing, of course, integrated with the reporting techniques that we just now discussed. Each one of them, writing for documentary and for feature film screenplays, totally different. For example, we were thinking that we'll create actually a newsroom setting, because we are having a studio there as well. So newsrooms where this course is going to be taught. That's something little frill that we thought that it's possible that we'll getting. Something that I really want them to learn is how to pitch a stories. A lot of us who joined journalism did not know how to pitch a story. I mean, it took a long time to be able to pitch a story in one sentence, and these are the things, these are the little elements that we, the usual elements that we all have been taught or we practice. These are the things that we want to bring in here. But I want to know from you all that how else do you want can news reporting, editing in the current scenario, how differently can we do it?
See, reporting, I guess everybody will talk about, but to come back to editing, and that is because I've seen from the Express to Caravan, in between magazines also, and that is an area that is critically important, and in Indian journalism is almost dead, because the newspapers have come to believe that editing consists of basically just putting your commas and full stops right and finishing there. I'm finally at a place where we do rewriting, fact-checking, proofing, etc. And the critical importance of that in actually running a story that is foolproof is actually lost in Indian journalism. So the whole editing process, to look at it as just going beyond correcting copy, for us in the end when something goes wrong, the editor is at least as much responsible as the reporter, but in newspapers and television this is not the case. The reporter is taking all the responsibility. So I don't know what the editor is for. So the whole criticality of editing in terms of what goes out is being lost. I mean, television, it has another meaning altogether, so I'm talking of print altogether, but that whole process is totally devalued. The idea, we don't have fact checkers in our industry in India, they don't exist. I don't know of any other place apart from Caravan, but do you have a fact checker? Maybe EPW has a fact checker. That is
Actually, we are supposed to have it. It often does not happen. You know, I mean, from spelling names to doing a double check on dates, places, and just even quotes. And you see, the problem, Hartosh, is so much of the internet has made it that much simple for people to literally cut and paste. And you have to do your own little, anti-plagiarism kind of checks up. And very often, we are supposed to do it, but we often don't do it. I mean, we don't have the the wherewithal, we don't have the human resources to do it. I mean, ideally it should be done. The person on the desk who's not just marking commas, full stops, whether government G should be capped, Prime Minister P should be capped, that going beyond studies.
I think
Plagiarism is such a serious issue
plagiarism is
because-
something that you should teach them. What is plagiarism?
Because
People don't
we are encountering good writers, you would be surprised at the kind of writers. Some of them really do not know that this is not supposed to be done, and these are people senior in the profession who have not encountered that kind of check
It's a very
before.
serious issue. In fact, 2 years in Times School of Journalism, I got several students. They were pasting paragraph. They didn't realize it was plagiarism. I had to tell them that this is plagiarism. They don't know.
You cite your source.
Yeah, they don't know what it is. Yeah.
But day for yesterday, I was at a dinner at our faculty thing, and I heard these horrid stories. Apparently, the entire class had plagiarized, and it was not, 60%, 70%.
All of it.
And then, JGU has
that is-
has machines and kind of thing.
Last year,
It was 100%.
So that is not
100%.
someone who doesn't know.
That's not
no,
something
last year in Symbiosis for MBA,
Hello.
out of the 96 students, 94 of them have got plagiarized because of the software. No, it's a serious problem.
That's why ideally your editor, the one who edits the story, that person gets a byline also in some
Yeah.
places. I mean,
Some
like,
places.
that's why it's in India.
The Time magazine
These
has
days,
that.
these days
Accountability
even,
also.
the agencies, the major agencies, Reuters, AFP, AP also often do that. Where they say written by so and so, reported by so and so, edited by so and so.
Or checked, or just checked by so and so.
Fact checked.
Fact checked by so and so.
Currently, this is more fundamental. I mean, not just
No,
be a
plagiarism
journalist,
is
but
one issue.
yeah, the basic thing
But
is
I think
followed.
the role
So
of
weirdly,
the
there are a lot
desk-
of people in journalism, perfectly smart, well-educated, people with postgraduate degrees are like, oh, we wouldn't have done it if we were writing an academic paper, but in journalism it's okay to copy.
Yeah.
That's good.
In fact, it's more dangerous.
But
In a way.
symbiosis does not teach that plagiarism is a,
No, what happened is that
it's
last
a
year,
natural kind of self.
last year they
But
introduced the
ECJ, among my first classes, they say very clearly, and they define what plagiarism is. Take work without attribution, that's plagiarism. Whether it is
But the
whether it's
symbiosis
a
does.
clause, whether it's a whole sentence, whether it's a paragraph.
last year.
Even your own work, which I find sometimes difficult.
Self-plagiarism.
Yes, self-plagiarism is also an
last year
issue.
That's-
I have a problem with it, but it is true.
There's an anti-plagiarism software which they introduced as part of their global ambitions. So when they ran the MBA first year students' papers,
Everything.
out of 96 and 93 of them had
Very easy copy.
So
those checks.
So
we
that's
do it
obviously
all the
something
time.
we should tell them the very first class.
That's very, very
Very
important.
good. We will know.
More precarious. There is no
Really?
fact checking.
Yeah.
But
There is no
in
fact
terms
checking.
of
There is no
plagiarism-
accountability.
In terms of
Well,
plagiarism, less
part of
There's
our
less
course.
scope.
behind that is understanding that there is a story and how do you suss out stories from everyday reality and what you read in newspapers, what are your sources of stories. Usually it is from the newspaper and other, so it's very circular. In fact, that's a critique, that much of it comes from the same stuff, so it goes on recirculating, within the public sphere. But I think there are other ways of looking at society in general to understand where the stories can come. And that's where all your painting and all your creativity is very important as well, because how you visualize the stories.
Also, given the fact that the name of the school is called School of Journalism,
Huh.
Communication, journalism comes first.
Huh.
Should this be more robust? Can
So
this be made any more?
in TSA, one thing which I thought was very successful is that for reporting, just send the kids out to the field.
Yeah.
Every month, every week, as many times as possible.
You're doing so many, but you're surrounded by stories. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
You're surrounded by
Yeah, we plan to
stories.
do that a little, probably
There was a
second
Facebook
semester
suicide
onwards,
case, right?
yeah, to
Yeah.
more practical.
The Facebook suicide.
Really? Where's Sonipa?
There was a Facebook murder in Cleveland. in the
Yeah,
US.
exactly.
Ah.
There was Facebook suicide in Sonoma. Didn't hit the global headlines, but it happened. You go
Our first story actually that we should start doing was the Murthal story.
Yeah.
We should start doing it. Forget the students.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
Last year's story, the chapter.
The
We
one
completely cut.
issue, I mean, in that communication and news reporting has to come together, but because more and more with all the noise that we have, journalists have to realize they're storytellers. cannot write a report that does not compel. Too often we end up reporting some starvation, some NREGA story which nobody will read and feel very good about it. But it's our job to force people to read. And that's where communication actually should tie up with news reporters. I mean, I can tell you that you can give the same people the same sort of reported raw material and see the copy that comes out. One will be read, four will not be read. You can't describe that process, but that has to be tried out. How do you tell an effective story from your
And I
reported
think
material?
development journalism suffered massively
Because of
because
this.
of that. I mean, it has been one of the most unimaginative reporting on any subject. And so therefore it's always got this sort of socially conscious but dead dull. I mean, who will...
IIMC was development communication.
But that becomes development communication.
But that was
here
the
it
official
becomes
job.
like the state.
Wilbur Strand.
So
Yeah,
what I mean is,
different.
that if you're looking at, let's say, Narega, how do you report that?
But I think
And
that's
how do you
where we
write
have
that?
done well, yeah, because of work of yours and others. I think that's where, in fact, a lot of the changing of the development story from a dull as ditch water to something that walks and breathes and, you know, quacks. That is the story of actually journalism, and I think you can take credit.
Okay.
One tiny thing.
Okay.
To go back to Suruchi's sort of media ethics and blah 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 blah. Sting operations. Where do they stand in the larger
The
scheme of
ethics thing,
ethics?
Ethics.
Yeah,
But
but
in both the journalism theory and practice,
Yeah.
obviously, there and also the media ethics part, that should these are things that should cover the sting operation. And with obviously in India with television and also with the Helka, etc. that they have done,
Right.
and how it has become, the meaning has
so that's
changed.
going to be first.
And
Yeah.
trolling as well. I hope trolling figures
Yeah,
out.
that's one
Absolutely.
piece of-
These are all ethical
Yeah, yeah,
part when we
yeah,
cover
yeah.
the digital issue.
Okay, the last component before we.
Oh, there is more.
Yeah, something more, just a little.
We are offering 7 courses, so there's a lot.
So there's a lot that Pankaj will quickly tell us about literature and film, comparative perspective.
Literature and film. Okay, I should have said
And
this
the last bit
earlier.
is, media
I'm not a
media
journalist.
and social
My
justice.
background is English and creative writing. So this is more my specific sort of area, and also film. Let me talk very quickly about what the course does. So
You get
it's
2.5
English
minutes.
literature into films. 2.5 minutes. Why don't we say 30 seconds? Just to make it more fun. Short fiction and film have had a long and illustrious relationship, despite the frequent use of novels as materials for narrative film. Alfred Hitchcock has said that the cinema's natural counterpart in literature is actually the short story. So not to just sort of bring that focus, but also to make our lives easier and students' lives easier. We're going to make them not read novels, but short stories. From James Joyce's The Dead to Rudyard Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King, great movies have been made from short stories. So they would read the short story and watch sections of the movies as these two forms of artistic expression, cinema and the written word, are radically different. And we see interesting dissimilarities and surprising synergies when we examine the two in a comparative perspective. So we're going to look at them and make sure that they understand that they're different. And I think that difference is I'm going to take that as a really valuable sort of value, for want of a better word, to frame not just this course but the earlier thing that we were talking about, which I appreciate hearing. So the class aims to underline precisely this dynamic dialogue between the written word and the picture. I'm going to talk about how the picture is so vastly different. And it's not just the picture being 1,000 words, but I think it's actually more than that. It does impact people in radically different ways. So that's what we're going to do. And there's a few other movies, other short stories that we bring up, but just a couple of examples. So thanks for hearing.
But here, Citizen Kane is not, it's a long talk.
Oh my God, yes.
But it should figure somewhere.
Yeah,
But
we
there's
will
no-
show the
you
opening
should
shot.
show a story. That's not
We can
really-
show the opening shot of Citizen Kane, Rosebud and all that stuff. We'll spoil the story for
Well,
them. I won't do that.
I'd also suggest that maybe including there is very little Indian material, but there is a recent Punjabi Chauthi book which uses short stories and it is done wonderfully, and because the context is here in terms of writing in...
Can I write it down? Or what is
There's
it?
a film which does the three
The
stories of
Bengali.
Manto, which is
Manto, these are not Manto. Chauthi Koot is the writer is Surinder Singh's the writer is a Punjabi short
Okay,
story.
Suruchi, let's not all talk together.
No, I think these are great. No, hold
Yeah,
on.
Hartosh was
We're
saying
getting Punjabi. Let me write that down and a couple
Chauthi
of Bengali
Koot.
things.
Chauthi Koot.
Chauthi Koot.
Now it's on Netflix as well.
Now, there are a number of Indian films where media features quite importantly, from New Delhi Times to
Yes.
most recently
Of
what
course.
page.
Piggy Life. There's probably the most
Piggy
recent.
Life.
Pastry was before that.
Yes, and of course, the international films, there are a number of them.
Right.
Indians are shockingly few.
You have a lot
I
of
looked
regional
into
Yeah,
short
there
stories.
is-
Yeah, library films.
Ah,
A lot
yeah.
of regional short stories in different languages. So
There was this amazing, I mean, Amitabh Bachchan is, I know very little about that, but I remember this one. There was a Bengali short story that was turned into a film with Amitabh Bachchan in it. He's like a...
Yeah, but Satyajit Ray has just done so
Not
much.
to read. We were just.
And also Bengali commercial cinema in the 60s, 70s, they all were drawn from literature, which kind of changed
Right,
from the 80s.
right. We should talk about that.
And Malayalam also.
Malayalam. Okay.
Chemi and so on, so much. I mean, Chemi is an old example. And Tamil and Kannada too.
Was a very good one to look at.
Godoli.
Well, the last course is a little tricky one, in the sense that we had named it. So I'll want suggestions on the naming. So we thought we'll call it Media and Social Justice: Gender and Conflict. I shared this with somebody, and I was completely rubbished and said that this is the same person 1 month back who criticized these words, and apparently I'm using the same words now.
sorry, I missed that. What was it?
Media and Social Justice, Gender and Conflict. But does it sound pretentious? Does it sound not
I
working?
think social justice is a good word. to
Without the kind of subtitle, it sounds good.
Yeah, exactly. Social justice, leave it at social justice.
But then social justice is like...
No, so
Could even
then
be media and human rights. I'm kind of neutral between the two.
No, I think then within that, think of all the elements that you want to bring into your course, rather than, because your human rights and gender is not enough. I mean, when you talk of social justice, it
Yeah.
doesn't go even halfway.
Even
So
just
that's-
undergraduate, we were thinking that we'll do gender, conflict, and human rights anyway covers both. I mean, the
No, I
human
think
rights.
it's
No, no,
criminal
you
justice
just-
system.
Okay.
I'm a little lost. What is it about? Because this doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah.
What is it so media and social justice?
Yeah.
What about
Or
media and
what
social
about-
justice?
So it's basically a training on gender awareness, conflict sensitivity. Because gender and conflict, under the spectrum of social justice are actually not optional. What has happened is that a lot of, in the course, when we started off, these were seen as optional extras. These were not seen as the mainstream. Yeah, so but it is actually mainstream in the practice of journalism. And that took us, that is why so much of it wasn't reported or continues to be underreported even today. So this is
No, I think
what
the criminal justice system is, in a sense, it's within the rubric of the criminal justice system that you see all these violations happening. So I don't know if you can bring in that without making it too wordy. But basically it is crime and punishment, and you can put it in very simple words if you want,
And also so with the increasing armed conflict, the armed conflict doesn't seem to reduce at any point of time. That has a direct impact again on conflict and gender out there. The intersections are
because
are
there's
pretty much
caste
there.
also.
Yeah.
Remember, there's caste. There's so many other
Like,
groups that
so
are.
gender in conflict and is gender as a separate.
No, so this is what I'm trying to understand. If we are saying gender and conflict, but in a conflict situation, you also have the gender is a very strong element in the conflict situation itself. So should we just
could make a suggestion, instead of conflating gender and conflict, because I think that tends to confuse people, I would say have 3 different
Exactly, that's the
courses
initial
on
idea. We have
media and social justice, have one on gender and sexual minorities, for example, where you could bring a lot of the issues like sexual violence together. Have another one on conflict and look at conflicts within countries as well as conflicts between countries. So what happens when you have a civil war situation or an emergency situation versus what happens when you're at war with another country, and how do those dynamics of reporting conflict change and understanding conflict change, so that you've got a slightly more narrow focus.
So, but under the big head, we have these subheads.
Media and social justice, big head.
Well, I agree, it's better, but I think caste should also figure.
And
I think class in some way, I mean, how you put it is, but the point is, these are the sort of nodal points for, justice, social justice, eluding people.
But I'm assuming all of reporting at some point looks at all of these things. So is this a course that's designed to give you some practicalities of if you're in a conflict area, if you're going to Bastard, try and take Pureit tablets? I mean, what I'm trying to say is that otherwise in terms of journalism, gender, conflict, class, that's caste, that's pretty much what the entire country would be.
No, Radhika, this is the stuff that you have done. This is not the stuff that all of us have done. We went out there, just got the damn story came. We didn't care about anything else.
It's not a bad idea at all.
So, I mean, you had the luxury. Sorry.
Like for instance, BBC does a training for journalists before they're inducted to, how to address.
So that way the Red Cross has a whole series of guidelines on how to report.
UNESCO has.
No, I'm not talking about a HEFAT course. We are not talking about how to manage in a conflict zone. But when we say reporting conflict,
Yeah.
I mean,
What do you mean?
What do you mean reporting conflict? What do you do in a conflict zone? For us, mostly reporting conflict means 10 people dead, and the one army person has raped somebody else, and this is a backlash, and you come back.
It needs to be emphasized. I think
There's
it's
no
a
other
very
sensitivity
important-
that happens at all.
If I'm talking about the trans community, the fact that there are
Yeah,
different
exactly.
layers and different nuances, and we can't use Western constructs to apply to our India. This has to be taught. This is not something they're going to wake up knowing.
Yeah, even in gender, I think it should not just be limited to conflict, it's a larger issue.
Yeah,
Gender, in
From
fact,
land
brings in
rights to
transgender.
everything, there is a discrimination.
I still have I'm totally confused. So you can as well throw reporting out of it and say this is the sensitization to gender conflict and
Issues.
social issues, because how is it related to reporting? I don't understand. I mean, you need to be sensitized. Obviously, as a person, as a reporter, your editor needs to be sensitized. How does it tie up with reporting? Are you saying that we need to report these subjects differently from how we report anything else? Do we bring a special sensitivity? Do we look at other issues? I'm just trying to understand what is the interplay between reporting these issues and being sensitized to them. That is my approach.
So I think I have a response to that. I think ideally one course should address two parts of it. Firstly, one should say when it's a reporting thing, these are, when it comes to reporting a conflict, this is what we do not do, and this is what India's northeast, etc. And another part of the course could be dealing with sensitization part, that you mentioned
So
earlier.
see,
which is
what
different
Hartosh is saying is, at one level, these do's and don'ts, they apply to any situation. But as a journalist, as a reporter, what are these special, if you are, suppose you are reporting somebody with AIDS, or you are reporting about somebody who a close relative has just been killed. I think this bigger sensitization issue, or a woman who's been assaulted. So I'm saying, there's a very thin line between what you see general reporting. They sort of they conflict. The issues get conflated. Yes.
We just discussed news reporting and editing, and we discussed a whole range of practices, which are practical arts. Now, there are situations in conflict zones where you have to go beyond these kind of neutral, this kind of a neutral understanding of how you practice, how you practice
also, it's an undergraduate course.
profession.
Just
There are case studies.
awareness, not about nuanced reporting.
Famous case studies, the Rwandan thing, the Kenya radio, that Rift Valley, whatever. Why we can take up our daily newspapers every day on Kashmir and find any number of case studies on how not to report conflict or Maoist insurgency.
No, and even the
Northeast.
theme by itself needs, I think.
So So I think there is a case for an extra sensitization there. I don't see how you don't get that.
No, I agree that there's a sensitization that is necessary. I think that's a sensitization that is a larger idea of any liberal education, and the reporter should have that. Now, in terms of reporting, that sensitization can inform you, but beyond that, is there a practical sense to it? I'm just trying to understand, of course, we can.
First year undergraduate.
Yeah, it's an undergraduate
So
course.
basically,
It's a
that's
sensitization.
it is largely a sensitization to issues that we
Introducing people.
normally don't have.
Right.
Why should
Beyond-
it only a sensitization course? Why cannot it have a practical element? In one course it can be divided into two parts, so it can address both these issues.
I think the issue is that in terms of the tools of reporting, a journalist will have to bring that sensitivity through all the training that comes to him. I think for her, and I think the point here is that it's in terms of looking for stories. A lot of gender and all, it's not that I'm going with a different set of tools. It's just that I choose to look at areas that often get invisibilized.
What perhaps Hartosh is
So-
saying, if I understand right, is that in the news reporting and editing component,
This should be there.
automatically is part
Actually,
of
it
that.
should, as Radhika
It
said,
should
it
be
should
a
be
part
part
of
of everything you are
Should be
teaching.
part of
I mean,
everything.
it should be.
Everything.
I mean, our stance as journalists should be that you start with the least privilege in a situation, and that will include. But
To have
yeah,
a
on the
separate
I do agree that most Indians or most people coming into undergraduate
They
have
don't have an idea.
ideas of conflict, nationalism, of gender, of caste, which are very problematic, and I think we should interrogate
I
those
think
ideas
so.
in
I
some
think it's
ways.
very important.
Even any of those caste,
And
caste
these are precisely the issues that don't figure.
That don't.
Whatever we want, these are self-evident truths that we
Communal.
should figure.
I have been told that the lunch is getting cold, so we'll carry this conversation there for the lunch.
All right.